Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I'm your host, the American Haunt Historian, Alan Searcy. Today, I'm going to continue on through my trek of Philadelphia and tell you some more ghost stories from the 18th and 19th century in the city of brotherly love. Being from Nashville, I've heard ghost stories related to the Civil War pretty much all my life. But in Philadelphia, they have ghost stories that date back all the way back to the American Revolution. So, this is one of my favorite ones. In the late 18th century, Glen Willow was a tiny village located in a dense thicket in between the Wissahickon Creek and the Schuylkill River in North Philadelphia. 20 cottages made up the small community, where hard-working families lived off the land. During the Revolution, George Roberts, a wealthy Englishman, came to the area with a slave named Tom. George bought a piece of property that had a grist mill next to the creek, and he built a large house on the location. After getting settled into his new home and renovating the old mill, George started stockpiling sacks of corn and wheat. Once the English miller got his operation running, he started to sell bags of cornmeal and flour to his neighbors. Word began to spread, and news of the mill's surplus was joyous news to General George Washington, who was badly needing food for his men. He sent a group of officers to Glen Willow, and an agreement was made for George Roberts to supply his hungry Continental soldiers with products from the mill. For several months, George Roberts lived up to his word. Tom, his slave, hand-delivered the flour and cornmeal to various camps in the area for Washington's troops. Yet, after a while, some of the men started having seizures and got violently ill. Smallpox, dysentery, and malaria were all quite common during the war, but something was different. What was causing these brave militia members to drop like flies? Eventually, one of Washington's chief lieutenants noticed that only the men who ate bread from George's mill were the ones who were getting sick. Despite his nationality, George Roberts had been selling his goods to the Continental Army at a steep discount and proved to be sympathetic to the Patriot cause. But something just didn't seem right. After consulting with General Washington, a small company was sent to Glen Willow to spy on the miller from England. Using stealth and extreme caution, Washington's men staked out the mill for several days and took note of George Roberts' movements. Strangely, George didn't leave the property very often. Typically, if there was something that needed to be done in town, he would send his slave to handle it. Nevertheless, George did have one visitor that stopped by in the middle of the night occasionally. Something was strange about the late-night caller. One of the men from Washington's group was so unsettled that he followed the mystery man back home. After surveilling him for a day, George's visitor was found to be a prominent loyalist that was rumored to be a British spy. Sensing that George was passing along information about the army, it was clear his allegiance was to the crown. The small force snuck into the mill to see if they could find the poison that had caused so many men to get sick. However, after an extensive search, not a single foreign chemical was found. Instead, the soldiers found a large bag of broken glass that the dastardly English miller was sprinkling in with the corn and wheat as it was ground. When it became clear to the soldiers what was going on, they fell back and sent word to General Washington. Within a few days, the group returned to Glen Willow with different orders: kill George Roberts and burn his mill to the ground. When the soldiers returned to George's property, they called out to him and informed the loyalists that he was surrounded and he needed to surrender. The men heard stirring in the house, and after a few minutes, Tom walked outside. The slave was taken prisoner, and the soldiers ransacked the house. After George wasn't found in the home, the men turned their attention to the grist mill. Before setting it on fire, one of the soldiers went inside where he found George. Instead of surrendering and facing the wrath of General Washington, the English miller chose to go out on his own terms. He opted to tie a rope to a beam in the mill and he hanged himself. Furious that they wouldn't get revenge on the loyalist, the angry soldiers turned their attention to the enslaved accomplice. As the men threatened to kill Tom for what he had helped do, the enslaved man begged and pleaded for his life. He swore that he only did as he was told, and he wasn't aware of anything nefarious his master was doing. According to Tom, George was a mean and violent man who often beat and tortured him. Any shipment he brought the army was at the behest of his sadistic master. Something Tom said struck a chord with a senior officer that day. He had compassion on the slave and allowed him to not only live, but told him he could have his former master's house. Washington's men burned the mill with George's remains inside. After they had completed their mission, the company left Glen Willow and rejoined the Continental Army. Tom continued to live in the English miller's home for several months. Unfortunately, once word got out about what George Roberts had done to the innocent soldiers, no one in the community would trade with him or help the former slave. After some time, the people of Glen Willow noticed there were never any lights on in the Englishman's old home. Tom hadn't been seen for a while, and it was thought he might have died or just fled the area. Authorities were notified, and someone was sent to search the home. And just like the neighbors had suspected, there was no trace of Tom. For many years, locals were afraid to go by the Roberts house. Those that lived nearby were convinced it was haunted and claimed to see the English miller looking out of the windows from time to time. Today, George Roberts' house is gone, and the remnants of his burned mill have long since been razed and built over. However, according to old-timers in the area, Tom and his former master still roam the Wissahickon Valley Park near the old house and mill. So, have you ever heard of George Mifflin? He was a very notable guy who was the first governor of Pennslvania. Shortly after he was elected governor in 1790, Thomas Mifflin purchased an opulent 3-story colonial-style mansion on a hill on Ridge Lane near the Schuylkill River. Located 5 miles outside of downtown Philadelphia, the house was Mifflin's country home and served as his escape from politics. With a gardener's house, ice house, milk house, bathhouse, barn, carriage house, and stable located on the adjoining 22 acres. In fact, the Mifflin Mansion was one of the first houses in the area with indoor plumbing. During the 9 years Mifflin owned the mansion, he entertained a who's who of Philadelphia society. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Robert Morris were just a few of the distinguished guests that the governor entertained in his home. In 1799, a year before his death, Governor Mifflin sold the mansion and property to Algernon Roberts. Roberts kept it for a few years and then sold it to Andrew McCacken. The property changed hands numerous times in the 19th century, and over the years, the land was portioned off and sold to developers. In 1893, the stately home was struck by a tornado and severely damaged. The Stein family, who owned the house at the time, sold it to a developer named William H. Albrecht. Albrecht bought the old mansion for pennies on the dollar and quickly made arrangements to tear it down, and he wanted to build numerous townhouses there on the property. Today, the Mifflin Mansion is long gone. In its place on the corner of Frederick and Stanton Streets, you will find a sea of row houses. According to legend, Governor Mifflin was very concerned about being attacked by hostile Native Americans in the area. He was so worried that he had a tunnel dug out under his home in case he needed to make a quick escape. Due to his fears of an attack, the governor and his family hid jewels, gold coins, and other valuables in the walls of the house and all over the yard there behind the home in case they were ever attacked. Much of that story began when Andrew McCacken bought the house in the early 1800s. Shortly after taking possession, McCacken extensively renovated the mansion. While working in the cellar with a servant, the men found a secret tunnel that led to a room where they found a trunk full of gold and jewelry. Unfortunately, later that night, the untrustworthy servant snuck in and stole a large portion of the stash. He was never seen again. The legend of the Mifflin treasure lived on throughout the years and eventually became front-page news in July 1893. During that time, a team of laborers were brought into the Mifflin Mansion to break apart some of the large rocks on the property to make room for the new houses that were going to be built there. While Italian immigrant Diego Artelli was chipping away at a large boulder, his pick bounced off the rock and stuck to the ground. Oddly, when Artelli's pick hit the dirt, it made a strange clinking sound. The confused Italian picked up his pick and began rapidly clearing away the dirt underneath it. As he dug, Artelli discovered a large jar containing 900 British gold sovereigns and dozens of Spanish double boons dated from 1741 to 1775. In all, his findings were worth $5,000 at that time. Today, that's worth probably about $200,000 in our money. Artelli abruptly quit his job and was last seen boarding a train to New York. According to his friends, the lucky laborer went back home to Italy for a fresh start with his newfound wealth. In the summer of 1894, as they were preparing to tear down the Mifflin Mansion, a large stash of gold Spanish double boons was found hid inside the wall. When the mansion was finally razed in 1894, a worker found a very old ruby ring behind a wall that was being torn down. Tragically, later that day, when the team began taking stones out of a cellar of the wall, the entire structure collapsed. 3 horses were killed, and 2 workers were severely injured in the accident. The following year, the Mifflin treasure was back in the news when John Stanton, a local man, discovered $15,000 in banknotes and some firewood. That's about $400,000 in today's money. As Shannon was splitting logs from the old Mifflin property, he found the money inside a brown bag jammed down inside a hollowed-out log. Like the Mifflin treasure, rumors of ghosts have also centered around the governor's old country home. People claim to see a shadowy figure walking through the home carrying a lighted candle back in the day. Those that lived in the area have watched him through the windows as he went from room to room late at night. It was said he was there to watch over the valuables left in the house. In the mid-1800s, some teenagers who had heard the legend, they went to spend the night in the Mifflin Mansion. Throughout their evening, it was rather boring, until midnight, when the house seemed to come to life. In the early morning hours, the young trespassers claimed to see a man holding a candle walking through the house, just as they had heard. The mysterious phantom walked through the house and down to the cellar, where he began banging on the wall where the treasure was supposedly kept. So, playing upon the ghost stories, a young lady coming home from a revival meeting in 1863, she felt a little mischievous and ran ahead of her friends. With no street lights to light the area, the girl climbed the pitch-black stairs of the Mifflin Mansion and waited for her friends to catch up to her. When her group came close to the house, she pulled her white skirt over her head and ran to the road while making a terrible hissing sound. Hysterically, the boys ran for cover, and multiple girls fainted in the middle of the street. After a minute or two, some of the young men began chasing the girls as she zigzagged down the street. Too scared to apprehend the spook, the boys chased the ghoulish girl from a safe distance. As this chaotic scene was unfolding, one of the girls ran to a nearby tavern and got the owner to assist them. The owner ran out to the streets with his shotgun and raised his weapon. When he had the ghost in sight, he pulled the trigger. Fortunately for the young girl, the gun misfired. As the barkeep fidgeted with his gun, the guys chased the ghost, and it disappeared, and the lady had ample time to get away. When the boys eventually caught up to the playful young lady, she had pulled her skirt down and acted like she was looking for the ghost too. Despite the shenanigans pulled on the kids on their way back from the church meeting, those that lived in the area swore the Mifflin Mansion was haunted. In fact, in April 1893, an old-timer from the area told a reporter from the Philadelphia Times some of the wild things he had seen on the property as a young man. Quote unquote, I stood there feeling my heartbeat and thinking every breath I breathed would be my last. The perspiration, as cold as ice water, came out of my forehead as large as pie cherries. Just as I thought I would fall over, I looked around, and coming down from above the trees was a bluish-white object that made my hair stand on end. The thing had a head like a lion, with a long, crooked horn growing out from behind its ears and reaching in curved lines to either side of its mouth. It had long, thick legs and feet like a turtle. From its back extended, gigantic wings were webbed like a bat, while from the joints and tips grew claws like a lobster. The thing's tail, it looked like a fan and seemed to spread wide enough to cover a whole camp meeting. As the monster gradually descended, it began to bark and whine like a whipped dog. Then it set up the most fearful howling I've ever heard. The wings flapped right through the branches of the trees, and just as it was about to pounce upon us, one of the boys cried, "Murder! Bloody murder!" That put life into us, and the way we took our heels and cut up the hill through briars and everything else was enough to frighten the thing that frightened us. So, the Mifflin Mansion is all kinds of crazy stories. Philadelphia has a ton of history, and like I said, I've done the book Southern Ghost Stories Philadelphia, and if you want to learn more about that, you can check out the book on Amazon. It's also available at Barnes & Noble. All my books are. If you go to a store and they don't have them, ask the manager at Barnes & Noble to order them for you. Barnes & Noble, they can be kind of tricky. Each story carries different titles, so sometimes you just got to ask them. So please like the video on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast, and be sure to follow us on Facebook too. You can find me over at Twitter or X. I'm at ATO Allen, ALLEN. I drop a lot of interesting ghost stories or grave robin tales there from time to time. I'm going to be at Smoky Mountain Terror, Johnson City, here in Tennessee on June 7th. Make plans to come by and say hello. So check back next time, and I'm going to do a St. Louis episode telling old ghost stories from the gateway to the west.